on my computer because we still haven't fixed the issue with the room. Okay. And okay. I need to share my screen. Okay, I have here just the starting code from what you downloaded for the activity. So the activity, we have the README. It was about creating a simple student page where you can add some student information, and well, we called it Facebook, CodeOps Facebook, but it was basically a single table on the MySQL that you hold the first name and last name of a student, and then on the front end you should be able to insert a new student, see all the students as a list, and then also as an optional part, click on a student to show the profile, the full profile. So these are the items that we wanted to do: have a list of students showing, have a form to add a new student with fields for first and last names, and then when submitting the form, the new student should be added to the database and displayed on the page, update the list automatically. Then have a delete button for each student, and after clicking on this button, student should be deleted from the database, and also see automatically an updated list on the front end. Style the page to make it look as nice as possible. And then clicking on a student, this was the optional part, that you could click on a student name and show the student information on the right. So to accomplish this, you will need to work basically on these two files. On the route students.js on the backend to complete the API routes, and then finish the front end either with just one component, or you could divide it and have different components, like one for the form, one for the list. Normally we start, especially if there is this time restriction, we start just with one component and everything, and then we could try to refactor and move things around and create different components. So we should start with the API server then. And let me see, first we had to install, of course, npm install on the front end, on the backend, sorry, and run this migration script so that the table is created. This npm run migrate. This creates this students table on the database, and that will actually check it bigger with MySQL. Show databases. This one is the one that it's created by the, well, we had to create it previously, and then if we use this database, we could see the tables. There is this students table that has been created, and with describe students, we could see its structure. So it has an ID, a first name, and a last name. So this is our database on the backend. It's already created by running this npm run migrate, and it's all set. I should quit. Okay, so let's start with the routes then. You had some part already created, this get that selects all from students. So we do a get method. The route is the base one, the route one, but remember that this is also filled with a part that it's defined here on the app.js. So in app.js, in this line, we define how our routes will all start. So all our routes start with /students. It could be something else, like on a previous example, I think we had /API. In this case, it started, all of them start with /students. And then that line here indicates to the server that whatever I receive something starting with /students, then go to this file and continue and see the routes there. So this file, students router, it's here, and it makes reference to the students.js file that we're working on. So that means that routes will start with /students, and then we'll continue with something. So /ID or /name or /whatever we want to add later. We could also add over here. So start with. So that we remember that this, in fact, it should be like a /students, not only. No, not only slash. Okay. I think no one had any confusion with this, and most of you did it correctly, this part. So when I get a GET request for the /students, then what I want is to select all from my database, from table students. So here I said from which table I want to select which items. In this case, I want to select all, that's the asterisk, select all from students. And this DB method is asynchronous, so I should either use the async await or I can use the .then.catch. So I try to do this to select from a database, and then with the .then, I get the results and I send back the results.data. So remember that the results, as they come from this method, they have two parts, the data, which is the array, and the error message. And in this case, I specify directly that I want to send back only the array. So I send the results.data. Otherwise, if there was some error, like connecting to the MySQL server, I do a catch and I send back the error part. This was already created, and then we had to create these three ones. One for getting a student with a concrete ID, one for posting information, and one for deleting a student with a concrete ID. So the get student with a concrete ID, it's very, very similar to this one. So I could actually copy exactly the same part here. And it's just that instead of selecting all from students, I'm going to select all from students, but with some condition. And the condition is that the ID should match this ID that I get here. This ID, I can reference to this with rec.params.id. So this should match rec.params ID, which is what we get from the parameters. But in order for this to work, I should transform it to a backtick format, right? So I'm changing the double quotes to these quotes. And now I'm going to select all from students where the ID matches this one that I got from the parameters. The rest is the same. So again, I do a .then, I get the results, I send back the data. It will be an array with just one item, hopefully, because just one ID will match this. And if not, I get send back some error. And I could start actually testing those. So I'm going to start my server, the backend. And in fact, like one by one, before I go on with the rest, I could check this with Postman. I think my port is 5003, okay. (5003), and my route is either students, where I should get back all students. It's an empty array because I don't have any data included, but I could add some data to check it. Just so if I want to like be able to test it better, I should move here Facebook, insert, and into students, and let me check the insert. To students should be first name, last name. So the insert command specifies is to which table and which fields I'm going to be updated, and then which values. So let's say I'm going to insert just one student with my name so that I have something to check. Okay. So now if I try it again with Postman, try to get all students, I should get this one student created manually with ID 1 automatically created by MySQL. And if I test the route with students and the ID 1, I should also get this one back. While if I test some other ID, it's an empty array because it doesn't find any student with this other ID. So for the moment, these two seem to be working. And then this insert that I just did manually here. So this same command that I just did here, I could actually copy it. I need to now be able to do it not manually, but through the code. So I'm going to write this SQL here and going to put it in between with the backtick. So now, of course, instead of something like this, hard-coded a name and a surname, here I would need to pass some first name that I would be expecting from the post. So the first name will be replaced by first name sent by the frontend. Last name will be also replaced by something sent from the frontend. The rest is the same. So this will be my query. And in order to run it, you will need to do again db and pass the query inside. You can pass it like this, directly into the parentheses, or like this. And then again, .then. The same, it's exactly the same, the rest. And here a .catch. So where do I get these? Well, these two things, first name and last name. This is a post operation, a post method, which means that from the front end, there will be some kind of fetch with the post method specified and also with the body, and the body must include these two parameters. So when I come here on the backend, on the request.body, there should be, the request.body should be an object. So the request.body is actually an object that has first name equals to something that I have sent from the front, and the last name. The request.body has these two, should have these two things inside. I must make sure on the front end that these two parameters pass inside so that I can capture them here on the back. So then I can simply say like first name equals rec.body dot first name, and the last name the same. Or I can do it in the more shorter format. So put both of them to the object destructuring so that I extract the first name and last name from the rec.body. So from this object, I'm going to extract first name and last name properties and assign them to first name and last name variables. So one of the two, not both of them, one of the two would work, and it's the same. Like this, on the first name variable, I have the rec.body first name, and on the last name variable, the rec.body last name. And then I use these two variables to fill in my query here. Okay, so another thing, remember that the insert on the MySQL doesn't return, in fact, any result, it just returns like an okay. So if I do want to get the updated data, I need to do again a select all. So I could, in here, after I get the result, try to run the same, this part here again. So just copy all this and place it in here. So right after I do the insert, then I also do a select all and everything. But it's even better if I create like a helper function so that I can reuse more easily. So let's call this helper function get students. And I'm going to pass this exact same thing because this function will simply do a select all to get all students whenever it's called and get the results. So then instead of copying this same code again and again, I simply call here the get students. And the get students will send the data. So inside the get students, I have a send data. So this one will be doing the finalizing of this request. So calling get students will do a new select, will get the results, and will send back the data. So in fact, in order to not repeat the code, here I could actually also replace all this with a simple call to get students. So this is exactly the same. The simple get is equivalent to this, and then I reuse these get students for the rest of my functions as well whenever I need them. Yes, is this like clear, the get students, how we would use this like helper?
Anna, this is like the get items you explained when. Okay, so I tried to use it here, but I had understood that get items was like a whole functioning function that it was called get item, so it wasn't working, and I was like, why is it working? But now I understood, like you create it inside there, and then you go back and use it when you need it.
And
yeah, okay.
In fact, if I want to use it like this, like I copied the code, this needs to have access to also the response. So I should actually pass in here request and response like this, like the other functions have. So these two items, I pass them to get students so that the get students is the one responsible for creating the response and continuing to the end. So this is one way, or the other way is that instead of the get students finalizing and sending the response, the get students just returns the result.data. So it could be also like this. This is a helper function. It just gets the data and returns the data to the one that called it. So it returns the data, and then in here, I simply get back the data from what the get students returns, and then I finalize the response. So both ways work. I'm going to leave it like this so that it's more clear that this one gets to do the final part of the interaction. So then I need to also pass request and response here. And So let me check it on the Postman again. I'm going to check the other two just in case that we messed something, because I already changed this also to use this. Okay, seems to be working. And then for the post, I need to add the body part. And the body part should have a first name and a last name. And Susie Johansson, something should be with 2S. I sent, and the get students, because after I do the post, the get students it's called. So again, it grabs all the students and then it returns all the array so that I can use on the front end the updated array. Okay, with these get students, you get the whole array again, you do a select all, and then what you return is the whole array. So that one also seems to be working. And then for the delete the student from the database, again, I can create the SQL from before here. So I create this. In this case, it's not an insert into, it's a delete command. And the delete, it's delete from students. It's a bit different the way it is constructed. So you delete from students and you specify which item you want to delete, which condition it should meet. So in this case, it is, the condition is that the ID should match the one that I got from the request parameters, from this part, which I can access with rec.params.id, or the name that I have specified here is the same name that I can use here. So delete from students where the ID matches the one that came from the API route. And then the rest is the same. I execute the SQL. If it's executed correctly, I get all students. I call the get students function, the helper function, to grab the updated array and send it back. Here you were wondering for the next, some of you, why it was here, what we have not seen it. So all these methods that are used on the server, they have access to these three arguments, the request, the response, and the next. The next is not always used. If you are like on the last part of the chain, remember we talked about middleware, that there are some functions that they go one after the other. So we have seen an example where we intercepted a function before here, and then we use the next to call the next function. And so next is used when we want to pass like the torch to the next function in line and chain that will do something after we finish. But in this case, these concrete methods here are actually the last part of the chain. So they are sending back a response. And so they don't need to use next because they are not calling anything else next after they finish the work. So this next is not necessary. You could even delete it. So if you don't want to use it, you don't have to have it here either. But if you wanted to do something and so that this is not the last part, then you could use next to call the other part. Okay, so we deleted this. And let me check also the delete method. So let's try to delete student, and I have to put an ID here. So for example, student 1. I send and I get back the updated table, which is now with one just item, missing the person that I have just deleted. Okay, so questions here. I'm going to remove some of these comments to leave it a bit cleaner. So if I wanted to make it even better, in fact, whenever I'm doing this DB, let me check it here. Okay, this is more on the front end. We will see it on the front end. So this is okay. For now, we have the bucket running. We have our methods for inserting, for deleting, and for getting all students. And so then we go to the client. The URL here, with the MySQL. And let's go to the client, npm install. So this is what we had, a very simple version also with not much information inside. I can start it. I have the console here, I guess, in case I get any error. So there was a variable here already defined, the state variable students, that it will be the one that will be holding the students array that we will be getting back from the database. Every time I'm going to do some fetch, I'm going to store it on this array. And so I start with the use effect. This use effect, remember, it's a hook, it's a way of declaring that whatever I put in here will be done on page load, on loading, on mounting the component. So that means that right when I start the page, the get students method will be called. And this will be done only at the moment I reload or load the page. So this is a way of calling already from the beginning this method. And this method that is already created, it's doing a fetch on the /students URL. So the API on the back /students, a fetch that is a get, because I don't specify any options, I don't specify any other method. So this is a get, and it will get all the students, and it will store the students. When it gets the response, it will store it to my students array. Okay, and so I could directly here add some section. Well, in fact, it should be in the other div to show the students list by using the map. And then for each student, I return, let's say it will be a div again with the student name and the student first name and student last name. This would be a parenthesis, I think, instead. And also remember that this item needs to have a key. And the key can be the ID of the student that is already created for us from the database. So I'm mapping the students array that will have all the items that I got back from the database. And for each student, I write down, I create a div with the student ID, student first name, and student last name, just to see if I can show them. So now I can see it here. If I had more students, so now I just have one, but they should show one after the other, name and last name. So I need some way to add students. So I will create a small form. With just two inputs, one for the first name and one for the last name. And I will copy this. We can have the two inputs stored like in two different variables, and then we need to create like two different state variables for these two. And we will have two different methods to update these variables. Or we can create one state variable that it's an object with these two properties. So up here, we can either say that the two inputs are going to be separate, like first name, and then a method to update this first name, and this is just a string. And then the same for the last name. So this will work, but imagine if we have a form with many fields, this is not the most optimal way, because like this we also create different methods and we will have different handle change functions for each one. So ideally, we put all this in just one object. Let's call it new student. And this is an object that we can initialize to some empty string. So that will have a first name and last name. But initially there are these two empty strings. So I will do this second way. And so then my form needs to update the new student dot first name. The first input will be related to new student dot first name to update this part of the object, and the second input will be updating new student dot last name. Okay, so instead of first name, it's actually new student dot first name and new student dot last name. New student is not defined. It's with a capital S, okay. And I will be using also the name attribute so that I make the handle change function more automatic. We have seen these last names with forms on the front end. So like this, I can set the onChange function. So when user inputs something, we will be calling the handle change. The same thing here. And then I need to create this handle change. It's not defined. I get already some errors. So here, function handle change. It takes the event. This comes automatically. I don't really need to pass it here, but if you want, I can also like pass it, the event like this. But it grabs automatically whenever there is something related to a click, or well, whenever we have an event listener, like on an onChange and on click and on submit or whatever, it gets the event automatically. And so by using this event, the event.target value will give me what the user has input, and the event.target name will tell me which part of the object I want to update, if I want to update the first name or the last name. So the handle change will set the new student to an object that will be the previous student. So it should be the new student from before, and then I am updating the property that the eTarget name defines to the value that the eTarget value sends. So here it's where I store the user input, and this name makes reference to either first name or last name, so that I know that when user inputs something on the first name input here on the first text box, that means that I'm going to change the first name to what the user has entered, and then on the second time, I will update the other part of the object. Okay, so the handle change should be something like this. And then I'm going to add also a submit button and an on submit handler for the form. So in fact, here I can use this format, but if I don't pass any arguments, I could simply say it like this. This can also work. So both of them, if I don't pass any arguments, both of them will work, but it's good also that we learn to use it in this arrow format. So I'm going to copy it in the same way here as well. And I will need the button. So when this button is clicked, it provokes a submit event that is captured from the form, and then the submit event calls the handle submit function that I need to create. And first of all, I prevent default so that the form doesn't try to connect with the server sent without me accepting and doing what I want. And what does this form need to do? So, sorry, this is an add new student. So this will need to connect with my backend with the insert route to insert a new student into the database. So I'm going to call an add student function that I need to create. So just so that I don't put everything in here, I actually want to separate this to a different function. Same as I have a get students, I will also create an add student. Let me write it in the same format, like in arrow function. I'm mixing them so that we see both formats. Normally, one uses mostly one or the other, not mix. It's not a problem to mix them either. So this add student is again going to be using a fetch. Two students. But in this case, I need to specify that the method is a post method, and I need to pass as a body the last name and first name that I just got from the form. Okay, same as I was doing in the postman when I did the post method and I had to create a body part that included first name and last name. Here as well, I need to specify the options part, this options object. That includes a method. Define that the method is a post method. Includes the headers. That is, that I'm going to copy. Because I remember more or less, but not exactly the structure, so that the content type is JSON. It defines that the body is of a JSON type, and then it includes the body. That for the body, we stringify, JSON stringify, we use this method to pass the JSON format the information that we want to send. So which information we want to send? First name and last name. So this new student, basically. So the new student object that we created from the form, we pass it here on the body. So now the fetch needs also to have the options. And then we can do it with the dot then. We get the results, and first we pass them to JSON, and then we have this second dot then that we get the data. This will connect to the post method. The post method will insert, hopefully, the student that I have just sent. And then, remember here in the post method, first, when we connect to it, we insert the student, and then we grab back all the new array of the students, and we already sent back all the students. So this method, the response, the final response, we have some data, which will be the updated array. And so this updated array, I need to store it again with set students to update my students array with the updated one. So I set the students to data, and then also the cuts. Error, console log error. Stop me at any time, right? So I created this form for adding a new student, and let's say reading target value. Let me see. Which one I mixed? I'm reading target. Student first name. Change. Just going to pass the event in here. And yes, I think that was it. And also pass the event here. Okay, and so I see it, and if I put something else here, I also see it here. So every time I click on that student, a call to the backend is added, even if I refresh the page. So for example, check that if I just load the page, these are maintained because they have been inserted on the database. So one thing also, some of you were wondering how to clean the form. So now if I try to add something else, the form is not cleaned automatically. In order to clean the form, remember that we do it here on the handle submit after we call the add student. So after we use the data of the form to send back or to store or to do something, this add student is the one that sends the data to the backend and stores it. So after we call the add student, we clean the form by setting back the new student, that is the one that holds the form, to this clean object. So to first name empty string and last name empty string, the same as we have used for initializing it. So the same that we did here when we initialized this new student, that we created this empty object, we reset it to this empty object in order to clean the form, sorry, here. And in fact, we could store this this clean object, if you want to call it, we could store it somewhere out here. So like let empty object, so that we don't have to copy again every time this. And so we simply use this every time we want to use this empty object. We use this empty object either for initializing here the state, or here for like cleaning the state again, the student. So I set it to this empty object, and like this, I have a clean object to start my form again. So now I should be able to something, I don't remember. So when I add it, it's emptied. Okay, questions on the form? You could try to put this also in a separate component. So all this small thing could go on its own component. But I guess that most of you did not have the time to create a lot of components in order to make sure everything works, etc. So it's okay to also have it like this. So the error that I got is because if we put this in this format, then I need to pass the event in here. Otherwise, if I just say handle change, I don't need to specify the event and it's automatically passed. But if I put it as a narrow function, then I do need to specify that this will be expecting this event argument. So between the two, it's easy to get confused. And that's why normally I do it like this without the arrow function when I don't have to pass any more arguments and it's just the event because I know that the event will come automatically. So I just use it like this. Okay, so we added the student, we get the updated student, and we're missing the button to delete the student. Okay, let's add this button. We could add it with an icon, or we could add it with a symbol button. So we could start with the button and then pass to an icon to make it a bit nicer. So if I want to delete, I can just have it like this at the beginning and just make sure that the functionality works. So this button should be connected to some on click, and this on click should call the delete student function that I need to create. And in this case, I need to pass the student ID because I need to pass which student I want to update. So I'm going to be putting this in this arrow format and pass the student ID to it. This one, the same student, so I'm mapping for each student. I know its ID, its name, and I'm calling this delete student to delete it, passing the ID. Because remember that on the backend, the delete student needs to have the ID of the student to delete. So I need to create this method again. And here, it's going to be pretty similar to the add student. So I'm just going to copy it. Just that the method, instead of post, it's going to be a delete. And I don't need to pass any header or body because the ID is not going to be passed from the body. The ID is not going to be passed here as a parameter of the URL. So the ID, this method gets an ID as an input and uses this ID to construct this URL. So I'm going to change this to the backtick format and slash the ID. So by calling students slash ID, the ID that I got as an input, as a parameter here when I call this function, and by specifying that the method is delete, this will connect on the backend with this method, with the delete method that expects slash student slash ID, that we delete a student and then again return all students, because remember we do the get students and we return all students, the updated table. And so the rest is the same. Since I'm expecting to get all the students back, I also store these students to the updated table to my students state variable. Okay, let's try this delete button. And I delete, I get no errors. It seems that it's not there. Even if I refresh, it's not there. So it should be working. Nice. So I have like the basic functionality. Now I can either try to make it a bit nicer to put some format with maybe Bootstrap or simple CSS to try to make it look a bit nicer. So let's try to put, for example, the button, class name, button primary, and the form, it should be is it form input or something? Then I don't remember now by heart the Bootstrap commands for all this, but we could also change this delete button with an icon. So instead of having this as a button, we use an icon, and we use these material icons. We can use these material icons I have used from Google. Let me check how the syntax of these material icons. I'm just going to grab one. So should be with a span and material icons. I'm not sure I have loaded it. So if you want to use the material icons, you also need to load it on the, as you say, as you do with the Bootstrap. So to load the CDN of the material icons. So here, this is class name. Material icons outlined, and I think the name is trash for the trash for the delete. Oh no, it's delete. So you create this span. Let me put it with a prettier in a bit bigger format so you can see it. Here we created this span with the class name material icons outlined and the name delete. And then in order to be able to use it, I need to add the CDN, because now if I save it, what is it? I just see the word delete. In order to translate it, you need to go here on the client public index HTML, and the Bootstrap is already loaded, but you need to add the link to the material icon CDN. So find this material icons CDN. I'm not sure if you have this. There are different families, so this one just loads the normal ones, and I think the one that I have added now on the app is the one that's called outline. Let's see it like this. I get it to trust. This I will need to copy from a previous. No, I have an error here. Material icons. Okay, I get my trash can. Material icons. I had an error on the class name. So at least like this, I have it with some icon next to it. And also I can try to center it a bit. We'll put this to container and repeat text align, text center, is it called? I think on the bootstrap. And some spacing. So these are all CSS things. I'm not going to spend much time on this. I want to also show, like on clicking, that we do get the student profile as well, so that we have this part from all of the functionality apart from making it nicer. So this was the optional part. It was that when you clicked on the item, you wanted to show somewhere on the right or on the bottom or whatever, the user, like a user profile, more information, which in this case, it will just show the same because we just have these two things, a name and a surname. So even if we put it like on a featured profile, it will still be the name and the surname. But if we had more information, let's say an icon, an image, or an email, so then it will make more sense that I click and I see it somewhere on some other part of the page with more details. So I'm just going to do the on-click part. So here there was one thing that I saw in a couple of you. If we try to put an on-click on the div, so this div contains the student name and last name. It added these things. The prettier these things. In fact, I'm going to also put this in a span so that it makes more sense. So if we try to put the on-click event here on this div, so that when I click on the div, I get the featured student, then I will have an issue because when this part of the div is clicked for another reason, because I want to delete a student, so I click on the delete icon, this will trigger both clicks. This will do the delete student, but it will also trigger the div on click. So if I have here like an on click event, that will do something, for example, the get student profile or something, or set featured student, or whatever you want to call this function. So if I have this on click here on the surrounding div, but in the inside here I have another on click, this on click will also be counted for the div as well. So it will be a double on click event. So then you will have some weird things because you will be trying to delete a student, but at the same time, it will detect it as if you are trying to show the student profile. And it will be an error because the student will not be found because it will have been deleted. So in this case, watch this and try to move the on-click somewhere else. Either move the button outside of the div or move the on-click inside this part. So that in this case, only when the name part is clicked, this on click is triggered, and then when the delete is clicked, it's not related, so it doesn't provoke this double click effect. And so let's say that this on click, when I click on the name, I want to get the student profile and I need to specify which student. So again, I pass the ID in here. And this get student profile should be a new function. This one is just get, so I don't need to specify any options. It's just the fetch part, but I do need to specify which ID I want to get. So I will use this format to pass as well the ID. So, so which one this method is from the backend? This method is a get one student. So it's a get, but with a specific ID. So this should return me one concrete student. It's a select with this ID. So I'm going to do the .then rest.json. And the second dot then. And here I don't, of course, need to update the whole students array because the whole students array is the one that I'm showing on the list. This get student profile is the one that will be storing the student that I got to some featured student profile. So I should create a new state variable to store the featured student, let's say. And so that this method just updates the featured student. Let me finish this one, and then we create the featured student. And since this featured student, this, let's see, I think it's going to be, we return back an array, even if it's with one item, it's an array. So let me see, if we want it as an object, if we want it to be, let me just store it as an array. And console log it and see what we get. So this data is going to be an array again, even if it's just one student, the select all, this select method always return an array, even if it's with one item. So if I just need the object from it, I should specify that I'm just going to get the first item. That will be the only item actually from the array. And then what I'm storing, instead of the whole array, I'm just storing this object. So I could change this to be this object of the featured student. And I'm just going to make it not very elegant, but after my list, so somewhere here, let's say I have here a featured section, and in this featured section, I will be showing the featured student first name and last name. First name. So now it always shows. It's even better if I put this inside some conditional so that it doesn't show if this array is empty. So in order to do this, I could check the featured student. It's not an array, it's an object. So if, let's say, featured student first name, if this exists, then show this div, else you don't show anything new or something. So if I don't want to show anything, I would just use this filter, the double and so if this object has something on the first name, then I will show the feature section. Otherwise, it will not show anything, like in this case. So now when I click on a student, it shows and it updates this featured section, which is, again, just the name for now. But if you add some more fields, if you want to play with it, you could add some more fields and then maybe add some other information like an image or an email. And then on the feature section, you could show a different section like a bigger name. So instead of a div here, it could be also an H4. And so I show the feature student bigger. Okay, So from the functionality, I think we are done. Then this needs quite a lot of work on the CSS, but we could work later. So once we have everything working on the functionality, we can start working on the CSS. Questions? Let me check. I had some notes. I think I had them here of what I wanted to. Okay. Yeah, so any questions or from the feedback that I gave you, things that they did not, you did not understand correctly, or I mean, I did not explain correctly. I know that I'm missing some feedback from a couple of you. I will try to do this later.
Anna had a problem with, I didn't do that much, but when I tried to put the form, something happened. Then I took the form away to see if it was the form, but it seems not. And it gives me like error app, nothing in the local host 3000. It says that nothing was returned from render. This usually means a return statement is missing. And then it shows me like a list of errors, like starting from things that are in the index.js, problems with Webpack.
No,
so I don't know if it's something that I did, or it has to do with the original problems I had with the Webpack and everything.
But you have this return statement that it says. So you have the return keyword.
Yes.
We can check it. Yeah, if you maybe later if you show your screen, or
Yeah.
I have your code actually, I think so. I mean, if you have it on the GitHub, it's one of the ones that I did not yet check, so I can check it and see what was the issue.
When I in the terminal, Node1 says get. So well, I can show you later, or you will see in the because it seems it's going.
And this happened when you try to take the form out of the component.
Well, I only had the app.js. I didn't. If I take out the form, you see.
No, I mean, did it happen? You said you tried to take it off, or no? It wasn't then.
No, when I used the form, the first time I put the form in, then I tried to comment it out, but the problem is there.
Okay.
Already, it seems like a WebSocket problem. I don't know where it is.
WebSocket is normally when it cannot connect to the backend or something. But if the server, the backend is running and doesn't give you any error, we can check it.
Yeah.
Let me just also, another thing I want to mention here, like, so this fetch is asynchronous, as we know. We can do it with the async await method, or we can do it with the fetch then catch. But remember, if you use this way, whatever you want to happen after the fetch, you have to put it inside here on the .then. Okay, so let's say that I wanted to like console log something. Console log hello after the fetch. So I may think from how the code is structured that the fetch will happen, and then when all this will finish, the console log will happen. But this is not exactly true because the fetch is asynchronous, and so this will take some time. And it's probable that the console log will happen before the fetch, even if I was intended to do it afterwards. So let's say I'm going to also put inside here some other console log. So, and then here console log, hello from inside the fetch. And so let me open also the console and see which one will happen first. So this is on the add student. Let me try to add another student. So you see that one happened first is the one after the fetch, and then I got the console log from inside the fetch happening. Okay, so with console log, it's okay because it's a console log, but that's for everything. So if you needed to here to like call some other function, you wanted something else, some other functionality to happen after you add a student, to update something, to show something, to update some state variable, maybe from true to false or whatever, you need to put all the actions that you need to happen after the fetch inside the .then part, not after it, because this after, it's not a real after when we are talking with asynchronous. It may happen before. So this is a bit confusing when we use the .then .catch format, because with the await, you can actually put one after the other because it will wait, the await keyword will make that the fetch, we wait for the fetch to happen and then we move to the next line of code. So instead of using it like this, I've had it with the let result equals await fetch and this part, let's say. And let data equals rest.json. So if now I just put here hello after the fetch, this in this case will happen after the fetch. No, this I have to await as well. So instead, let's just transform this to this async await format. Okay, so I wait for the data and then I wait for the result and then I pass this to JSON and I grab the data and then I console log hello after the fetch. So this will happen in this case after the fetch has finished, because this await format means that we are waiting for this before we pass to the next line of code. So sometimes it's cleaner to use this way because it's also visual what will happen one after the other. While this way it's a bit confusing, you may think that if you put something out here, it will happen afterwards, and in fact, it may happen before. Okay, so if I write it, so now we'll see the console log. Well, we don't have any other console log in this case. But yes, just remember this with the .then, the difference between using the .then and the await. That's why sometimes we propose that the await method is a bit cleaner to follow. Okay. So I think that's it for the milestone. And yes, I will leave it like this with not much format for now. We will do also a Bootstrap Flash lecture at some point that we learn a bit more about Bootstrap, but it's true that the design is a whole other area and you need to spend a lot of time by fixing things with the design. So this takes a lot of time as well, the design part. Anyway, yes, other questions, sorry.
Maybe, I don't know if there's a time, but be useful to see an example of a request query.
Ah, yes, that you said.
Yeah,
yes.
It's probably very simple, but I keep getting, I'm very confused at how to.
Okay, let me remove this and get it back to how we had it and see how we can do this. Okay. No, it's not simple. It's actually like until you use it a couple of times. Let's see where we could use the query. Let's say in the get students. So let's say here on the get students that we want to have them, the students that they are returned, they are in ascending order of, I don't know, last name. So this is kind of a query parameter because it's something that specifies a bit further our command, our query. And for this, we wouldn't put it inside the API, like write it as a parameter or there ascending or something. We will use it as a query parameter, and we will specify that the order is going, we want it to be ascending. So for specifying a query parameter, you use the question mark, and then we specify the variable name so that this is called order, and this is the value of it. So we want all our students, and I want them returned with an ascending order. We construct our URL like this, and we have a call on the backend. And then on the backend, on the get part, so in here, which in fact now it's in here on this method. Let's say I want to specify on the select using this request parameter query, request query, how the order should be. So whatever I have sent from the front end after the, I will copy this, after the question mark. So this is what I am getting from the front end. This part here, I can access on the rec.query dot whatever variables I'm passing. So rec.query.order should be the same as, should have the value ascending, the one that I have passed here. So if I want to put it inside my query on the database, I should write it same as I do when I pass some ID, order, rec, order. Is it order or order by? Let me check. Select, order, order by. So I see order by the column name and if it is ascending or descending. Okay. So order by last name and if it is ascending or descending, or order by country. Okay, or select by the country, or even if you don't put ascending or descending, you can just specify by which field you order them. So let's try different. No, instead of sending ascending, I'm going to send by which of the columns I want it ordered. So let's say I want to send that I want to order it by last name. So get all students and order them by last name. This is a query, the query part. And so from the backend, order by. So here the order is last name, what I get from the front. And so I can use this to order my query by last name. The URL, the API endpoint, so this part doesn't change. In here, I don't need to put whatever parameters I'm waiting from the query. So I don't need to specify in here that I can also have the option to have the question mark, the order or whatever. The query parameters are optional, and that's why we don't pass them, we don't specify them to the API here, to the endpoint, but we can use them. They are stored in the rec.query. Whatever I pass after the question mark, it's stored in the rec.query, and it's stored by the name I pass it. So if I pass, as we did on the front end, /students question mark order, this is the variable name, and this will be its value. So rec.query.order will be holding this last name. So this should make that the get stores our user by last name. Let me see. So now I have them stored by last name. I can add some other and me. Students map is not a function. It is order here. I made something with the add student, I think. Let me check. Data, it's data. It's okay. Okay, suggest map is not the function. That means that the data that I get from these fetch students. Don't know why that changed now, and it's not working. The add student. Students options. Data. Okay, let's forget about this error for now, but just focus on this part here that we get. So now I was, at least this, I think it works, because when I get the students, so the first time I fetch the students, when I reload the page, it already does a fetch with this query parameter, and it orders them by last name. So you see that they are ordered by how the starting of the last name. If I did not pass this query, so as I had it before, and I reload it. Okay, then of course, I cannot expect a query parameter here, because if I don't pass anything, this is empty, and so this will give me an error. But if I don't pass this, I have them in the order I have inserted them, so not ordered. This is how we normally use the query to add some order, or to specify like that includes, name includes a part, but that it's not really the main query itself. So it's not the ID that this is part of the URL. But I don't know if Mele, you got how this is used by this.
Yeah, because I was trying to think of like doing a search function where you can look through the name of a task or the name of a student, but maybe that a request parameter makes it a bit too complicated. Because then I was confused, like, oh, do you need to then create a different path, or because you mentioned conditionals, because I was thinking, because then you have several database queries under the same get root. If I would, for example, use request query to search on a task or something.
So if you put the request query, you don't need to create different routes. So it's not that you're going to repeat this / route for if the query is this one or if the query is the other one, but you could in here check like if rec query order was last name, let's say. So then that means that I want to do this kind of thing, or basically check what kind of query, not that if it is last name, sorry, but if this exists. So if you got a requery.order, so if one of the query parameters was the order, because you wanted to order them, in some way. So then you could do this query and else if rec.query.search, because in fact what you wanted to do is some other search, then you do a different query with some so that the last name includes this search item that you added. So instead of creating different paths, so different methods here on the backend, you simply check the query parameters and see which query you have gotten, if you have gotten them all, or one or the other. Of course, this cannot be free, so the user cannot put on the front end whatever she wants on the query. You should specify when to create an API that I am only expecting these two query variables, either the order by or a search term for the name. And so you create for these two things that you expect from the front end, you create the different queries. This cannot be open. And so so when you will use this in the different to create a different query, depends on when you have the order or if you have a search term. But yes, it should be on the same general route, not a different one, because all of them, the main part of the path, it's /students. This doesn't change the query, it doesn't affect the main path.
Okay. And then you can tie like the request query, for example, search on the front end while replacing that, the input, if the user puts something in that populates kind of the search request query.
Yes, for example, here as well, the last name, here I pass it hard-coded, but this could also be an option on the form so that you have order by and you want to check last name or first name, and then the user clicked, and then instead of putting it like this, you just got this replaced by variable that you get from the user, so how you want it to be ordered. And so, yes, you don't need to use the string like this.
Okay.
The same as for, as you say, for the search terms. So this, if this was a search term, and then this you would replace with some search term that you got from the user. You need to change to backtick. And this search term could be part of your form or of a different form, a search, as we were doing when we were doing, for example, the bank account, that you were entering some search. And then this you pass it on the backend as a query.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's take a break. Search term is not defined. Okay, I'm going to upload this simple version for if you want to compare and check. I'm going to clean it a bit because now we did some tests and I think something is failing. And let's take a break. 5 minutes, try to make it 5 minutes because I want to have some time later to talk with each one of you. And so we continue with MVP part.